Greetings, true believers, and welcome to another incredible episode of History of the Marvel Universe. In our previous video, we recounted the origin and history of the godlike race known as the Eternals. In short, 1 million years ago, the space gods known as the Celestials transformed 100 of humanity's primitive ancestors into the Eternals we know today. But who are those 100 individuals, and how many of them have been documented? Fortunately, that question is easier to answer thanks to the first issue of 2021's Eternals series, which provides a list of all 100 Eternals. For the purposes of this video, I'll be going down the list and identifying each entry. At the end, I'll also be discussing some Eternals which aren't listed, along with some possible explanations as to why. It's also important to note that it's been recently established that Eternals cannot breed with one another. While I'll be pointing out familial connections that have been established over the years, these are now understood to be adopted rather than literal. This list is also broken up into various categories based on where the Eternals are currently stationed as of the start of this series. First of which are the Eternals stationed in the city of Olympia. This is the capital city of the Eternals on Earth, located high in the mountains of Greece. Number 1 is Zurus, the Prime Eternal. Son of Kronos, brother of Aelars, father of Athena, he's been the leader of the Eternals since the Titan Schism 200,000 years ago. He first appeared as Zurus in the 1970s Eternals series, but he's been revealed to have had earlier appearances. In a flashback in Captain Marvel number 29, the character referred to as Zeus was actually Zurus. And in Red Raven Comics number 1 from 1940, Jupiter was, in fact, Zurus, technically making him one of the first Eternals to appear, along with Athena and Makari, who also appear in that issue as Minerva and Mercury. However, the first Eternal to be identified as an Eternal was Icarus, first appearing in the first issue of the Eternals in 1976. Over the decades, Icarus has always been front and center in the Eternals books, so one might consider him the protagonist of the series as a whole. While all Eternals have similar baseline abilities, many of them have honed certain skills to specialize their powers. In Icarus's case, he is considered the fastest and most skilled flyer among his people. He is also known for his considerable strength and the ability to fire energy beams from his eyes. Next up is Rakhar, a thus far unseen character. Rakhar is mostly just mentioned in guidebooks as being Ajax's father. Conversely, the Eternal of Earth with the most appearances is likely Cersei. This is largely due to considerable time spent as a member of the mighty Avengers. As such, she could easily have an entire video dedicated to her history alone. She has similar powers to Icarus and the other Eternals, but is most skilled in the art of matter transmutation. This ability allows her to rearrange molecules and transform objects and animals. She can also use this power to cast images and conjure illusions. Cersei's parents are Helios and Perse, who are fittingly the next names on our list. These two, thus far, have never been seen on panel but have been identified in guidebooks as Cersei's father and mother. Next is Domo, an administrator for the Eternal City of Olympia. While he's most often seen operating out of his hover chair, he isn't confined to it. Another pair of unseen Eternals are Varen, sometimes spelled Verona, and Mara. While this couple have not appeared on panel, guidebooks have identified them as the parents of the Eternal speedster Makari. The next few are the Dolphin Brothers, a set of identical quadruplet boxers. These brothers have yet to be individually named, but they still count as separate Eternals. Over the decades, the art has sometimes been inconsistent with the number of them, but it's now confirmed that there are 4 Delphins. Next is Phastos, the engineer. He is a genius inventor with great pride in his ability to meet any challenge presented to him. His primary weapon is a hammer which can hurl bolts of cosmic energy. Another seldom seen Eternal warrior is the Gladiator Titanus. Little is known of her history, but she was one of the Eternals to be chosen to participate in the Grandmaster's Contest of Champions. A similarly obscure Eternal is Argos, whose sole appearance saw him manning their global monitoring network. There is also Atlo, a gladiator whose strength seemed to rival that of Icarus in Thor number 287. Ceyote is a sculptor who lived in New Mexico under the name Thomas Hawk. He has a Nephilim daughter who did not inherit his agelessness, and so while she grew into an old woman, Ceyote remained young. He briefly operated under the name Thunderhawk, during which time he was a member of a team led by Icarus called the New Breed. Several other Eternals took up superhero identities as a part of this team as well. Icarus was Sovereign, Athena was Corona, Phastos was Ceasefire, and Circe was Mesmer. The human-looking deviant, Ransack the Reject, also joined that squad under the name Warhead, making him the only non-Eternal on the team. Several other Eternals first appeared here, such as the negotiator Psychos, who took the name Psyche. Another was the university professor Suyin King, who became known as Chi Demon. Finally, there was the adventurer Orel, who took the superhero name Sparks. This team debuted in the book New Eternals Apocalypse Now, where another, Herpacratus, was mentioned as the creator of a healing nutrient bath, but not seen. Any connection between him and the Greek physician Hippocrates is currently unconfirmed. Other Eternals that have been named on this list but not seen include Mob, Bacchus, Horned Kronos, and Fionmac. Very little is known of these four outside of their names. The last Eternal listed under the Olympia section is Kingo Sunin. Kingo is noteworthy for having been a samurai in feudal Japan. In modern times, before the Eternals were revealed to the world at large, Kingo hid among the humans and became a famous Japanese movie star. The next group on the list are the Eternals of Polaria, their second city. First on this list is Vulcan, the leader of the Polar Eternals and the uncle of Icarus. Next is Viraco, Vulcan's brother and Icarus's father. Viraco and Vulcan fought alongside the thunder god Thor roughly 1,000 years ago. He was killed during that battle, but would eventually be the first Eternal known to have been revived by one of their resurrection machines in modern times. Zarin is one of the Polar Eternals' military leaders, while another unseen Eternal is Ama. She is listed in official handbooks as being Ajax's mother. Interestingly, while Ama is a Polar Eternal, Ajax's father Rakhar was listed as an Eternal of Olympia. Their other son, Arex, is also listed as a Polar Eternal. In ancient Greece, Arex was known as Ajax the Lesser, while his brother Ajax was Ajax the Greater. Next is Agonar, another of the Eternals' military leaders. And then there's Druid, a particularly infamous member of the Eternals. While he aided his fellow Eternals in their battles against the Deviants throughout history, he was disliked for how much he enjoyed the slaughter. Among all Eternals, Druid is perhaps the most skilled at mental manipulation and mind control. Shortly before the Eternals made their public debut, Druid hid among humanity working as a KGB agent. There's also Sigmar, an Eternal scientist stationed in Polaria. Next is Betilak the Interloper. For centuries, the Interloper lived apart from the other Eternals and battled a creature called the Dragon of the Moon. Another Polar Eternal is the philosopher Legba, who was introduced in the 2008 series. Akpaxa, Aramis, and Panix all also first appeared in that book as Eternals working under Druid. The rest of the Eternals listed here as citizens of Polaria have not yet been seen, but their names are Sol the Charred, likely a nod to writer Charles Soule, Daz, Jutro, Karnai, Kresnak, Zorja, Tengrai, Tungak, Queen Tabti, and Donar. The next section on the list is the exclusion, but we'll circle around to that at the end for reasons that will be evident later. For now, let's jump ahead to the Oceanic Watch, presumably based in the Eternals' third city, Oceania. Fittingly, their leader is Oceanus, an Eternal who is hitherto unseen, but we do know a little about him. Namely that Oceanus sided with Kronos and against Uranus during the Eternal Civil War 600,000 years ago, and that after the war and Uranus' exile from Earth, Oceanus retired to take up vigil over the Deviants. Meanwhile, Shastra and Thurio were among the Eternals to side with Uranus and were banished alongside him. Uranus and his followers first settled in a Kree outpost on Uranus. There was another schism, however, and after being attacked by the Kree, Shastra and Therio accompanied Uranos to Saturn's moon Titan, where they attempted to build their own colony. This also failed, leading to the destruction of Uranos and all of his followers except for one. Shastra and Therio were evidently resurrected by the Eternals' activation chambers before joining the Oceanic Watch. However, several of Uranos' followers remain behind on Uranus. The only one of them to be actually named is Astron. He was the one to actually question Uranos' orders after their banishment. The Uranian colony was eventually destroyed as well, and after being resurrected on Earth, Astron was reunited with his former allies as a member of the Oceanic Watch. Kalos the Destructor is a member of the Watch of whom nothing is truly known, while Arlok is another of Uranos' followers who joined him when he left Uranus. However, he never made it to Titan, as when his group were attacked by the Kree, Arlok was abducted and dissected. A 2008 edition of the official handbook of the Marvel Universe erroneously reports that Astron was the one captured by the Kree, but this is clearly an error. The last Eternal listed as a member of the Oceanic Watch is Argi, another unseen character of whom little is known. Given the nature of the majority of the Watch, one might presume that Argi was also among Uranos' followers, but this is unconfirmed. If the artwork in the pages of What If is to be believed, then Uranos had over a dozen unidentified followers. Of course, we've already named well over that number of Eternals whom we know nothing about and haven't seen, any of which could have been exiles with Uranos and later resurrected. Polaria alone could contain as many as 10 of them. The next group are the Celestian Priests, the spiritual leaders of the Eternals. They live in the city of Celestia in South America. First among them is Ajak, the Keeper of the Old Ways. Child of Rakhar and Ama, sibling to Eryx, and the prime interpreter and diplomat to the space gods. In ancient Greece, he was known as Ajax the Greater, while his brother Eryx was Ajax the Lesser. He also spent time with the Inca people in South America, where he was given the name Tecumseh. Ajak was the Eternal who communicated with the Celestials during the Third Host 1,000 years ago, offering a warning to the godheads, Odin, Zeus, and Vishnu, on behalf of the celestial judge Arishem. After the Third Host, Ajak and his followers sealed themselves within the Temple of the Space Gods in Peru to await the coming of the Fourth. It should be noted that when Eternals regenerate via the activation chambers, they have the ability to change their appearance and gender, something which Ajak has evidently done more than once. In her most recent resurrection after the coming of the final host, Ajak chose to return as a woman. Next is Makari, the Keeper of the New Ways and the fastest known Eternal. As mentioned, while most Eternals have a similar set of abilities, they are able to focus their training into a facet of their powers, increasing one by weakening the others. To this end, Makari sacrificed his ability to fly, fire energy bolts, and manipulate matter to make himself as fast as possible. In the 40s and 50s, he operated as a superhero under names like Mercury and Hurricane, and he first became a communicator for the space gods when he communed with Tiamat, the Dreaming Celestial. This actually made Ajak so jealous that at one point he even murdered Makari and plotted to prevent his resurrection. However, Circe, who had a relationship with him at the time, was able to use her matter manipulation powers to revive Makari by sacrificing herself. Makari has also most recently resurrected in female form, and despite their previous conflict, she and Ajak have been able to work together. However, she was deeply affected by the death of the Dreaming Celestial. In a desperate attempt to reach Tiamat, Makari overtaxed her senses and was left deaf and unable to speak verbally or telepathically. Next on the list is Herpacratus, the Keeper of Mysteries. Fittingly, this Eternal has not yet been revealed, and so little is known of them. Master Elo, the Keeper of Paths, has been seen, albeit briefly, in the pages of Quasar. He is noteworthy for being a philosopher that instructed Makari. Next is Ichel, the Keeper of Skies, of whom little is known, and the last Celestian Priest listed is the Delphin Mother, Keeper of the Soil. Once again, little is known of this Eternal, but one might assume some connection between her and the 4 Dolphin Brothers. The next group is the Titanos Hermits, although we don't really know what that means yet. Titanos was the first city the Eternals built, and was destroyed in the ascension of Kronos 500 millennia ago. The Hermits of Titanos are identified as Blind Orla, the Silvered Bride of Heaven, and Scab. Again, not much is known about these three aside from names, although Druid has reported interactions with them in which Blind Orla was mostly silent, the Bride of Heaven spoke in verbose poetry, and Scab simply threw his own feces. The next group is the Lemurian Mission, which consists of only 2 names. The mission was an attempt by Thena to help the Deviants become a better people. The daughter of Zurus, Thena is one of the most skilled warriors among the Eternals. Originally known as Azura, she changed her name in honor of the goddess Athena when Zurus and Zeus made a pact with one another. As a result, the ancient Greeks named their city of Athens in honor of her deeds, believing her to be the real Athena. Interestingly, during a time of peace between the Eternals and the Deviants, it was Athena who wanted to wipe them out. However, she softened on her position, in part because of her relationship with the exceptionally long-lived Deviant Crow. And so in modern times, it was Thena who rescued reject Deviants such as Carcass and Ransack. After Zurus' death, Thena served as the Prime Eternal for a time, until she was challenged by Icarus for the position and lost. Of course, Zurus eventually resurrected and reclaimed his title anyway. Joining Thena on the Lemurian mission was Coryphos, the Eternal Musician. Less powerful than most others of his kind, Coryphos has dedicated his time to mastering his art. In ancient Egypt, he was mistaken for the god Horus, while in ancient Greece, he was sometimes called Orpheus. Next are the Gaian Sisters, a trio who act as advisors to the Eternals' leadership. The first is Dinah of Times Past. A wife of Kronos, mother of Alars and Zurus, Dinah was originally mentioned in guidebooks and has only recently appeared in person. Next is Sybil of Times Present. A wife of Zurus and mother of Thena, Sybil has historically been uninterested in the great events of eternal history and seldom takes direct action. After Zurus' death, she declined to take the throne and instead allowed Thena to become the Prime Eternal. A lover of nature, Sybil was often confused for Gaia in ancient times. At one point, she lived alone in the Colorado forest, using her powers of illusion to keep humans from noticing her. The third sister is Tulane of Time's Future. Wife of Veraco and mother of Icarus, Tulane has thus far only been mentioned in guidebooks and not seen on panel. Next are the Tricks, a foursome of eternal crime lords. At the time of this video's release, only Jack of Knives has been shown. The other 3 are the Knight Ungallant, the Queen of Maces, and Ivani Golden Touch. All have been named but not yet seen. The next group are the Forgotten, those who have left and forsaken eternal society. Their leader is the Forgotten One, who you may ironically remember from the previous video. Throughout history, he has been mistaken for various mythological figures, including Hercules and Samson. However, he is most commonly known as Gilgamesh, a name he used as a member of the mighty Avengers. Despite not being a Celestian Priest, he has spoken directly with the Prime Celestial, the One Above All. During the time of the Fourth Host, he delivered a message from them to the other Eternals not to interfere in the Celestials' judgment. Having proven his strength against the likes of Hercules and Thor, Gilgamesh is a character who could easily have a video of his own dedicated to him. As of late, he has dedicated himself to protecting mankind even against his fellow Eternals. He currently has 3 followers: Utuna, who specializes in morale and intelligence, Dumuza, who specializes in support and logistics, and Ishta, who specializes in underworld operations. These 3 have yet to be seen. Next up is the Hex, an enigmatic group of which we know virtually nothing aside from the number of members. Even their names are unknown to us and are listed as classified. All we can say is that this is a group of 6 seemingly reclusive Eternals. Conversely, the next group, the Damocles Foundation, is more well documented. Formed shortly after the Second World War, the Damocles Foundation consisted of Eternals, Deviants, and humans who wished to chart the course of human evolution and determine which offshoot of humanity would be the dominant one, eventually coming to the conclusion that the rising population of mutants were a likely candidate. 2 of their members, Astarte and Electryon, have clashed with the mutant team X-Force. A third Eternal of the Damocles Foundation has been identified as Kanchan. While they haven't been specifically named on panel, one could presume that they were briefly seen in the flashback to the Foundation's inception. Before we loop back to the exclusion, the last batch of names are listed under location unknown. There's Aura of the Pandemonium Box, 0-22, written in Roman numerals, Luis Three Fingers, and a fourth entry listed only as All Records Lost. Initially, I wasn't sure if All Records Lost was a separate entry or simply in reference to the above three, so I reached out to writer Kieran Gillen on Twitter, who confirmed that it is a fourth Eternal. Aside from a few names, they are a complete enigma. Thus we come back to the exclusion, those who are, as the name implies, excluded from Eternal society. Eternals who committed a crime so great that after resurrection they are permanently imprisoned. The first two names are not excluded, but rather help maintain the exclusion. There's Lucifer, who serves as warden, and Charon, who provides security and transport, both of which are as of yet unseen. The rest are listed as simply excluded with an initial, but many of them have been identified. The first is Excluded K, who we now know to be Kronos. The father of Zurus and Alars, Kronos was once one of the prime Eternals. 600,000 years ago, he was the ruler of Titanos. But when his brother Uranus wished to conquer mankind, it sparked a civil war among the Eternals. It was Kronos who defeated and banished Uranus and his followers. After that, Kronos experimented with forces beyond his control, causing a cosmic explosion. This not only destroyed the city of Titanos, but caused Kronos to ascend into a more godlike state as a cosmic being. It was this deification that led to his exclusion from Eternal society. For all intents and purposes, he was no longer one of them. Next is Excluded SP, who was Sprite, an Eternal with the appearance and demeanor of a child. Despite their ability to regenerate into different appearances, Sprite was never able to grow into an adult body like his fellow Eternals. He even inspired the story of Peter Pan when showing off to author J.M. Barrie. While Sprite was a prankster, his antics generally weren't considered criminal by the other Eternals. That was until he tricked Zurus and Ajax into forming a Unimind with him so he could siphon off energy from the dreaming Celestial and use it to make the Eternals lose their memories and become humans. This was eventually undone, and Zurus killed Sprite for his crime. He was eventually resurrected in female form and confined to the exclusion for a time. Sprite has since been released and allowed to rejoin Eternal Society, albeit with her memories reset to an earlier point in her life. Next on the list is Excluded U, Uranus. Excluded for the crime of attempted omni-genocide, we've talked about Uranus fairly extensively both in this video and the last. After his civil war against Kronos, he was banished from the Earth and took up residence in a Kree outpost on Uranus. And after a schism among his own followers, he attempted to return to Earth but was pursued and attacked by the Kree. He touched down on Saturn's moon of Titan, but this also ended poorly as he and his remaining followers evidently destroyed each other. The only survivor was Sui San, who is the next on our list under Excluded S. She was soon found by Excluded A, Alars, otherwise known as Mentor. Both were excluded for the same crime, unsafe lineage. Son of Kronos, Alars left the Earth after his brother Zurus became the Prime Eternal. There was a schism between the two brothers because of Alars' belief that Eternals should find a way to have true Eternal children of their own. After rebuilding the colony on Titan, Alars and Sui San discovered a method of doing just that. However, one of their children grew into the most notorious mass murderer in the universe, Thanos the Mad Titan. As a boy, Thanos killed and dissected his own mother, Sui San. Alars spent decades trying to stop his son, but he too was eventually slain by the Mad Titan. Both parents were subsequently resurrected on Earth and locked away in the exclusion for the monster they had unleashed. And next on the list is Excluded H, whose identity has not yet been confirmed. But this is the 100th entry on the list. There are only supposed to have been 100 Eternals created by the Celestials, and yet there are 2 more excluded. Excluded E and Excluded T. Well, this is why we left the excluded names until the end. If we accept that the Celestials created exactly 100 Eternals, there's no other option for who these two might be. Eros and Thanos, the two children of Alars and Sui-san. Of course, it isn't confirmed that these two are who Excluded E and T are referring to, but we would have to mention these anyway, both of whom have far too much history to get into here. Now that we've covered the entire list, one would assume that we've mentioned every Eternal in the Marvel Universe. And yet some handbooks and other sources include characters who weren't included on that list. So let us quickly address these other potential Eternals and posit some explanation as to why they weren't mentioned. First is a character named Emlot, who in Daredevil number 105 is credited with bringing Heather Douglas to Titan so that she could become Moondragon. This is a bit of an oddity since every other source confirms that it was Alars, known at the time as Mentor, who brought Heather to Titan. The confusion is cleared up in a 2009 issue of the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, which confirms that Alars brought her to Titan, but Emlot took her to the Shaolam Monastery where she became Moondragon. The main reason I bring him up here is because of the Nova Corps files list Emlot and several others as Eternals of Titan. Also appearing in Daredevil 105 is Kazantra, who appears to be Mentor's second wife. The official handbook of the Marvel Universe also lists her as an Eternal. Other Eternals of Titan include Tycho, a young boy whose parents were killed during the Infinity Gauntlet event, and Demeter, who guidebooks also identify as an Eternal. The explanation here is pretty simple. After Mentor and Sui-san rebuilt the Eternal colony on Titan, they repopulated it with cloning technology and genetic engineering. Until the birth of Thanos and Eros, the only true Eternals on Titan were Alars and Sui-san. Every other so-called Eternal of Titan was either a creation of Mentor's technology or an alien settler, or a descendant of one or both of those categories. One character who does seem to be a real Eternal is Pixie, who first appeared in Marvel The Lost Generation, which takes place between World War II and the Marvel Age of Heroes. During this time, she fought as a member of the superhero team, The First Line. She is also friends and allies with Icarus, further legitimizing her status. Furthermore, after Sprite mind-wiped the Eternals, Pixie was one of several who were restored by Druid and joined his side. Another in that group was El Vampiro, an Eternal wrestler who first appeared in Thor number 290. While these two are almost certainly true Eternals, the most likely explanation for their exclusion from the above list is that Pixie and Vampiro probably aren't their real names. The official handbook of the Marvel Universe even lists Pixie's real name as unrevealed, meaning that she and Vampiro likely are included somewhere on the list of 100 Eternals, but under names we don't recognize. This could also be the case for Yutnappashton, an Eternal philosopher who built the Ark which saved many human denizens of Lemuria during the Great Cataclysm. I already mentioned the multiple unnamed Eternals who were banished alongside Uranus, any number of which could be among the unseen Eternals named on the list. One in particular is Astron's unnamed consort. As a wild guess, she could be Argi, the unidentified member of the Oceanic Watch, since the other Uranites were listed under that faction. There's also Thelius, the Uranian Eternal who was surgically transformed to resemble Marvel Boy, but became known as the Crusader. Initially, I assumed that he may have been Excluded T, until I realized that the number of entries on the list meant that was more likely Thanos. Handbooks confirm his real name is Thelius, so it's doubtful that he'd be listed under a different name. As another wild guess, since he was atomized by the quantum bands, perhaps they were unable to resurrect him and thus he's the one whose records were lost? But it's also entirely possible that he wasn't a true Eternal and instead some kind of genetic construct similar to the Eternals of Titan. This is possibly the case with other Uranian colonists such as Denga from Marvel Boy number 1 or Lily from Astonishing number 5. Of course, books from the 1950s are now considered fictionalized versions of actual events, and so we don't need to worry too much about characters from that era. One Eternal of Uranus to be named in the modern era is El Ta. His exclusion from the list means that, like the Eternals of Titan, he may not be a true Eternal. Speaking of which, there have been confirmed cases of Eternals having children with non-Eternals, none of which are true Eternals, instead referred to as Nephilites. For example, there's Deborah and Donald Ritter, the twin children that Athena had with the deviant Crow. She also had another son named Joey Elliott after she and the others were mind-wiped by Sprite. There's the mythical Icarus, who is the son of the eternal Icarus. And since Thanos is technically an Eternal, there's his inhuman son, Thane, as well. There are also Nephilites who have crossed over from other timelines, such as Apocryphus, the son of Circe from another universe, and Joey Athena, who seems to be a version of Athena's son Joey from a future timeline. And finally, the last character that we have to mention today is Hyperion. There have been several different versions of Hyperion from different universes, but it's been posited that some of them are Eternals. Specifically, the Hyperion of Earth 712, or Earth S, is supposedly the last living Eternal in his universe. As of right now, no Earth 616 counterpart is known to exist, at least not among the Eternals, but there is an unidentified Eternal in the Exclusion whose name starts with H. Of course, Hyperion is another character that could easily have his own video all to himself. But that's literally every Eternal in the Marvel Universe, so thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, share the video, and subscribe for more Marvelous content. Be sure to leave a comment letting me know what Marvel hero or villain you want to hear about next, and as always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me, including my Patreon page where for only $1 a month you can get your name in these special thanks here. So until next time, true believers, Excelsior!